Welcome to the Philadelphia Housing Authority's Public Housing Program. Today, you will learn how the Public Housing Program works. We will review important information regarding your tenancy and answer any questions you may have. Please note that during this presentation, we use the terms tenant and resident interchangeably. Before we start, we would like to introduce May. To better help you understand the Public Housing Program, let's use an example. Meet May. May is a current public housing resident. She is 41 years old, single, and is the head of household. She has a 14-year-old son named Daniel and an 18-year-old son named Joe, who is a full-time student. We will refer to May throughout the briefing by applying policies to May's household to help you understand how the public housing program works. You will each receive a copy of the Resident Guide. This guide includes important information on topics such as how your rent is calculated, maintenance, unit inspections, and tenant obligations. The Public Housing Program is the federal government's program for providing decent and safe rental housing for eligible low-income families, the elderly, and persons with disabilities. Public housing comes in all sizes and types, from scattered single-family houses to high-rise apartments for elderly families. PHA has been designated a Moving to Work MTW agency by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. This allows PHA to design and test innovative programs for public housing and the Housing Choice Voucher program. PHA has an Admissions and Continued Occupancy Plan, or ACOP, a policy document that includes important information on regulations and PHA's public housing program requirements. A link to the ACOP is posted on PHA's website. There are federal, state, and local fair housing laws that protect individuals from discrimination in housing, and PHA complies with these laws. If you believe you have been discriminated against, you have the right to make a complaint. You can make a complaint on HUD's website, with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, and/or with the City of Philadelphia's Fair Housing Commission. PHA provides meaningful access to its programs and services for those individuals who have limited English proficiency. You will be asked to indicate your primary language to your property manager. If you need language assistance services, PHA will provide them at no cost to you. Examples of services include translating certain documents, such as your rent letters, and interpretation services for a scheduled appointment, like an annual recertification interview. If your household includes a person with disabilities, PHA will make efforts to assist you. PHA will assist families who may need reasonable accommodation or accessibility features in their unit. Examples of reasonable accommodations include a ground floor unit with no stairs, an additional bedroom for a live-in aide, a higher utility allowance for a family with electric disability equipment, or a sensory unit for an individual with hearing disabilities. If you wish to request a reasonable accommodation, please ask your property manager. You will be asked to explain what type of accommodation is needed for the person with disabilities. PHA may ask you for more information about your requested accommodation or verification from a doctor or medical provider. PHA will notify you in writing when the request has been approved or denied. Reasonable accommodations are covered under the PHA Obligations portion of your lease. Under the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA, PHA provides some protections for persons of all genders who are victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. PHA will give you a notice about what kinds of protections you have under VAWA and how to access this help. For example, if you need an emergency transfer because you are a victim of domestic violence, you can make a VAWA transfer request. Please read the VAWA notice carefully and notify your property manager if you need any of the protections under VAWA. This notice is an attachment to your lease, and the protections under VAWA are incorporated into the body of the lease. If you'd like to request VAWA protections, please notify your property manager, who will provide you with forms to complete to process your VAWA claim. You will be asked to provide documents to demonstrate the need for VAWA protections. Like any assistance program, PHA depends on the honesty of its clients. To be clear, providing or signing your name to false information to obtain housing is fraud. If you commit fraud to obtain housing from PHA, you could be subject to eviction, fines, and even prison. Be assured, PHA will check the information you provide. To prevent any misunderstanding that may result in fraud, please ask your property manager if you don't understand something on a PHA letter or form. Under the terms of your lease, PHA may terminate or refuse to renew your lease upon discovery of material, false statements, or fraud by you or any member of your household in connection with your housing. You must adhere to PHA's reporting requirements. PHA has access to government databases which provide information on your wages and certain benefit payments that you receive. We compare this information to the information you report to ensure the accuracy and completeness of your reporting. If you have new individuals staying in your unit, or if a family member leaves the unit and you do not report these changes, you are in violation of program rules and may lose your assistance. Step 1. Apply for public housing. You have all completed this step. Step 2. Screening and verification to determine eligibility. You have all completed this step. Step 3. After applicants are screened and determined eligible, they are notified once a vacant unit is available and a unit offer is made. You have all completed this step. Step 4 is the unit tour so that a prospective resident can see the development and the unit and determine whether they want to accept the unit. A security deposit is required at this time. You have already completed this step. Step 5. Once the unit has been accepted, the unit offer letter is signed and security deposit and first month's rent are collected. A lease briefing, lease execution, and move-in date are scheduled. You are now at step 5 and almost ready to move in. Congratulations. Tenants must pay a security deposit equal to 1 month's rent or $99, whichever is lower. The amount must be paid in full prior to move-in. PHA will hold this amount while you are a tenant. You will receive this back when you move out, minus any charges for unpaid rent, damages beyond normal wear and tear, and/or other charges under the lease. Prior to move-in, you are required to pay the first month's rent. If you move in at any time after the first of the month, your rent will be prorated so that you only pay for the portion of the month in which you will live in the unit. Later in this briefing, we will go through the lease so that you will see what is in it before you sign it. Next, we will talk about utilities. Generally, only those residents who live in scattered sites will be responsible for payment of utilities. If you have accepted a scattered site unit, you would have already been to the utility provider and have the utilities set up in your name. PHA pays for utilities for units in conventional public housing. However, a resident may be charged for excess utility use. PHA develops utility allowance schedules, which are based on the typical cost of utilities and services paid by energy-conservative households that occupy housing of similar size and type in the city of Philadelphia. If you are responsible for payment of utilities in your unit, PHA will reduce your total tenant rent payment by a PHA-determined utility allowance using its utility allowance schedules. Your property manager will provide you with information on your utility allowance. Your lease indicates utility payment responsibility, as well as responsibility for certain appliances. If you are responsible for the payment of utility bills, within 5 days of lease signing, you must go to the utility company with the signed lease and open a utility account in the name of the head of household or co-head. Proof of utilities must be provided to your property manager within 5 business days. Utilities not supplied by PHA must be in the name of the head of household or co-head. Failure to maintain active utility service for all utilities in the name of the head of household or co-head of household is considered a breach of the lease. Let's assume May is responsible for payment of heat, cooking, and other electricity. May lives in a 2-bedroom unit. PHA would use its utility allowance schedule to determine her utility allowance. For example, her UA may be similar to the following: $30 for heat, plus $10 for cooking, plus $36 for other electric, for a total utility allowance of $76. If May's total tenant payment is $471 per month and her utility allowance is $76, the amount she would pay PHA each month as her rent is $395. Keep in mind that May is responsible for making payments to the utility company for her utilities. Let's review the process for calculating income and rent. There are a number of factors that go into calculating the rent you will pay for your unit. We will discuss gross income, adjusted income, total tenant payment, TTP, and tenant rent. We will review these factors and show you how your rent is calculated. Your gross income is your income from all sources before any deductions. Your adjusted income is your gross income minus deductions. PHA only allows 2 deductions from income: $500 per household if at least one adult household member works at least 20 hours per week. Medical insurance premiums for households where the head of household, co-head, and/or spouse is elderly or disabled. If May earns $320 a week, working 20 hours a week at Walmart, and receives $400 a month in Social Security payments for her son Daniel, her gross annual income would be $21,440. May gets a $500 deduction since she works at least 20 hours per week. If we subtract the $500 deduction from May's gross annual income of $21,440, her adjusted annual income is $20,940, or $1,745 per month. Total tenant payment, or TTP, is what you are responsible to pay toward rent before factoring in any tenant-paid utilities. With 3 people in her household, May's TTP would be 27% of her monthly adjusted income. In this case, 27% of her income is $471. May's tenant rent is her TTP of $471 minus her utility allowance of $76 that we calculated earlier. As a result, her tenant rent is $395. Ceiling rents are used to cap income-based rents. If your calculated TTP is higher than the ceiling rent for your unit, you pay the ceiling rent. For example, if the ceiling rent for your unit is $900, but your TTP minus any utility allowance is $1,000, you would only pay $900 in rent. In this next section of our briefing, we will review the different types of unit inspections. PHA conducts a number of inspections: move-in inspections, Uniform Physical Condition Standards or UPCS inspections, housekeeping inspections, preventive maintenance inspections or PMIs, Real Estate Assessment Center or REAC inspections, and move-out inspections. Move-in inspections are completed to note conditions and any repairs that are needed before you move in. A record of the move-in inspection is maintained by the property manager and a copy is provided to you. You should retain a copy of this inspection report. UPCS are conducted once a year by PHA to ensure that the unit is maintained in decent, safe, and sanitary conditions. Housekeeping inspections are conducted once a year. The inspection will evaluate the housekeeping conditions, safety conditions, and your care of the unit. You will be informed in writing of the deficiencies found during the inspection and notified of any action required to correct the deficiencies. You will have 14 calendar days to correct any deficiencies. The PMI program allows inspectors to inspect units and identify and correct potential problems to prevent equipment failure before it happens. Inspectors complete minor repairs noted during the PMI inspections, as well as completing existing work orders assigned to the unit. This is completed at the same time as your UPCS inspection. REAC inspections are conducted by non-PHA inspectors to assess the condition of PHA's public housing properties. The REAC physical inspection emphasizes health and safety deficiencies because health and safety deficiencies are critical to the well-being of the tenants. PHA will inspect your unit at the time of move-out and will provide you with a written statement of the charges, if any, for which you are responsible. Generally, the head of household or a co-head will be present during the move-out inspection. PHA will notify you of the inspection results within 30 days of the termination of the lease or move-out from the property. PHA will send you a notice about inspections before they happen. You must provide access to your unit for any of these inspections. You may reschedule an inspection if needed, but you cannot reschedule an inspection more than twice without good cause. Inspections are covered in the PHA Obligations and entry onto the property by PHA during lease term sections of your lease. In this next section of our briefing, we will review the different types of unit inspections. During normal business hours, call 215-684-8920. During non-business hours, emergency repairs can be requested by calling PHA Security at 215-684-1911. PHA staff will create a work order for the maintenance staff. If something in your unit needs to be repaired, please report it immediately. Note that PHA will presume permission to enter the unit for repairs that you request, even if you're not home. If there is an emergency, PHA may enter the property at any time without advance notice. Maintenance requirements are also incorporated into your lease. Emergency conditions are generally those which are hazardous to the life, health, or safety of the occupants. Emergency repairs will be completed, even if temporary until a full repair can be made, in 24 hours. Emergency repairs include major leaks for flooding, gas or oil leaks, electrical problems that could result in shock or fire, no heat if it's below 60 degrees outside, broken toilet, broken smoke detector, no hot water, or obstacles preventing safe entry or exit from the unit. Generally, PHA will complete all non-emergency repairs in an adequate, competent, and professional manner within an average of 30 days from the notification date. Non-emergency repairs are generally completed between 8 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. You are required to pay reasonable charges for the repair of resident-caused damage beyond normal wear and tear. A list of maintenance charges is also included as an attachment to your lease. A list of repairs and the corresponding charges can also be found at your property manager's office. For example, if PHA has to change the lock on your door because you lost your keys, you will be charged $65. You must pay repair charges within 45 days of the date you are notified of the charges. If you get locked out, you may call PHA Maintenance at 215-684-8920. If it's after hours, call PHA Security at 215-684-1911. Continued occupancy is the term used for the period of program participation after you lease and move into your unit. You must follow all PHA and program rules in order to be eligible for continued occupancy in the public housing program. We will discuss some basic PHA policies and procedures that families must follow to be eligible for continued occupancy. Recertification is the process by which you update your income, allowable expenses, and family composition, and then PHA updates your rent. Generally, PHA will conduct recertifications once every 2 years. The following families will be recertified every 3 years. Families paying ceiling rent, and elderly and disabled households on fixed income. Note that for families on ceiling rent, PHA will conduct ceiling rent updates in the years between full recertifications. May got a raise and started working more hours. Her son's Social Security payment also increased. She reported these changes during her regular recertification. Let's compare May's income and rent from her last recertification to this one. May's income increased over $5,000 from her last recertification. However, her tenant rent only increased by $114. PHA would provide her with at least 30 days advance notice of the rent increase. Increases in your rent that result from a regular recertification will generally take effect on your household's anniversary date, provided you've had at least 30 days advance notice if the completion of the recertification is not delayed by the household. If less than 30 days remain before the scheduled recertification effective date, your rent increase will take effect on the first of the month following the end of the 30-day notice period. Decreases in rent will take effect on your household's anniversary date. Interim recertifications happen when you report changes in income and/or household composition between regular recertifications. Interim recertifications may also happen when PHA needs to make a correction in rent calculations. Generally, families are not required to report increases in income between regular recertifications. However, there are exceptions. There are some interim reporting requirements which are required and others which are not. Interim recertifications are required when your household composition has changed and/or you have reported zero income or only temporary sporadic income and your income increases. You may, but are not required, to report the following interim changes: a decrease in family income, or an increase in medical insurance premiums for elderly disabled households only. Note that you may only request one voluntary interim every 6 months, but required interims do not count toward the limit. Elderly and disabled households are exempt from the limit on voluntary interim recertifications. The 6-month clock restarts on the effective date of each regular recertification. The change must be verified to last more than 30 days. May had a baby and had to leave her job. She reported the change and requested an interim recertification. The only income in the household is her son's Social Security payment of $4,872. She no longer gets the working deduction, so her gross income and her adjusted income are the same. Since May's income was drastically reduced by $21,128, her rent was also reduced. This recertification was required because May was required to report the birth of her child. A few months after May had the baby, she went back to work. She was reinstated and given the same salary as she had before she left. Since May already had regular income from Daniel's Social Security, that is, her household did not have zero income or only temporary or sporadic income, May is not required to report this increase in income until her next regular recertification. Unless May has another interim, her rent will not change until her next regular recertification. You will receive 30 days notice if your rent increases after an interim recertification. Your rent will increase effective the first of the month following this notice period. For example, if you receive notice on January 15th that your rent will be going up, the rent increase will be effective March 1st. 30 days notice of a rent increase does not apply if the household is responsible for a delay in reporting, completing an adjustment. If your rent decreases as a result of an interim recertification, the decrease will be effective on the first of the month following the month in which the change was reported and all required information was submitted. If you don't submit the required information timely, it may delay the interim decrease in rent. If your income exceeds 120% of Area Median Income, AMI, for 2 consecutive years, your family will be considered to be over income, and you will be required to pay a higher alternative rent, which will be established by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. PHA will notify you when your income first exceeds 120% of AMI, so you'll know 2 years in advance of when the alternative rent will be applied. However, if your income decreases at any time, you may request an interim recertification. If your income falls below 120% of AMI, you will no longer be over income, and you will not have to pay the alternative rent in 2 years. Community service is the performance of voluntary work or duties that are a public benefit and that serve to improve the quality of life, enhance resident self-sufficiency, or increase resident self-responsibility in the community. Unless you are exempt, you must complete and document 8 hours of community service per month, 96 hours per year. You must complete the Community Service Acknowledgement and Self-Certification of Status form every time you are asked to certify your community service exemption status. If you are not exempt, you must also complete and submit the Community Service Self-Sufficiency Activities Log, on which you record community service activities. PHA reserves the right to verify completion of any claimed community service activities. Generally, you are exempt from the community service requirement if you are 62 years of age or older, you are blind or have a disability, your family is on food stamps, or you are engaged in a work activity at least 30 hours per week. A full list of exemptions may be found in PHA's ACOP. If you are non-compliant with the community service requirement, PHA will not renew the lease at the end of the term unless you agree to enter into a cure agreement or the family provides a written declaration that the non-compliant family member no longer resides in the unit. If after the cure period the family member is still non-compliant with the CSSR, PHA shall terminate tenancy of the entire family according to PHA's lease, unless the family provides documentation that the non-compliant family member no longer resides in the unit. As a public housing resident, there are responsibilities you must live up to. These are detailed in the Tenant Obligations section of your lease. Failure to comply with the terms of the lease may result in eviction. Here are some important tenant responsibilities. Comply with program requirements, pay your rent on time, and maintain your unit in good condition. Additional tenant responsibilities include attending all required PHA appointments, providing PHA with required information, promptly notifying PHA if any family member moves out or if a child is added to the household through birth, adoption, or court-awarded custody, allowing all inspections, and paying all utilities for which you are responsible. Good housekeeping habits are important to prevent health and safety risks, insect or rodent infestation, and damage to the unit or property. Tenants whose housekeeping habits do pose such risks may be in violation of their lease. Lease violations may result in termination of tenancy. Examples of good housekeeping standards include the entire apartment should be clean, free of dirt, grease, spilled food, and excess mildew and mold. Appliances should be kept clean. Floors should be clean, clear, and free of hazards. Trash should be disposed of properly and not left in the unit. Throughout the apartment, including food storage areas, housekeeping should be such that it does not contribute to rodent or insect infestation. Storage areas and closets should be neat and clean, and no flammable materials should be stored in the unit. You must act in a way so that your neighbors can have comfortable enjoyment of life, property, and recreation in their unit. If excessive community complaints are received because of the behavior of a household member or guest, you may be subject to lease termination. Follow your lease requirements regarding trash removal and, as applicable, upkeep of your yard and snow removal. Do not allow anyone in your household or your guests to destroy, deface, damage, or remove any part of the PHA property. Your lease and PHA's policies include program requirements as well as activities that are considered violations of the lease. Here are some important activities that you must not take part in. You must not commit any serious or repeated violations of the lease, commit fraud, bribery, or any other corrupt or criminal act in connection with the program, sublet your unit or rent out a room in the unit, permit unauthorized persons to live in your unit or allow guests to stay longer than allowed under your lease. Use the unit primarily for a profit-making business or activities, or carry, display, or use a deadly weapon. As your landlord, PHA has responsibilities you must adhere to. PHA's responsibilities are also detailed in your lease under PHA Obligations. Key responsibilities include maintaining the property, conducting inspections and making repairs timely, enforcing the lease, maintain required postings of important program information, providing reasonable accommodations for individuals with disabilities, and notifying residents of adverse actions and the related grievance process. PHA may require a resident to transfer to another unit under certain circumstances. The following is a list of some PHA mandatory transfers. Emergency maintenance, such as when life-threatening maintenance conditions exist in your current unit, building, or at the site. Demolition, disposition, revitalization, or rehabilitation when the unit or property on which you live is undergoing major rehabilitation that requires your unit to be vacant or your unit is being demolished. And occupancy standards, when your family size changes and your family is now too large or too small for your current unit. See additional details in the transfer section of your lease. Tenants may also request transfers for emergencies, such as when a household member has been victimized in a way that places them in imminent danger. Reasonable accommodations, such as when someone in your family has a verified disability that requires a modification that your current unit does not have. Requests for transfers must be submitted in writing and approved by PHA. If you would like to move for any other reason, you must apply to a specific site when and if the waiting list is open. PHA requires all families to abide by their lease and program rules in order to remain in good standing for continued public housing assistance. The termination of lease and return of the property to PHA section of your lease specifies those actions or inactions by you, any member of your household, or any of your guests that may result in the termination of your lease. PHA's ACOP specifies which of these actions or inactions result in mandatory termination of your lease. On the next two slides, we will provide you with some examples of situations which would result in lease termination. Some other offenses which may result in termination include more than 3 landlord-tenant complaints are filed for one or more lease violations during any 12-month period, where at least 3 of the cases result in a judgment against the tenant. Failure to sign consent forms. Failure to accept an offered lease revision. You are subject to a state lifetime sex offender registration requirement. Fleeing to avoid prosecution from the law. You engage in drug-related criminal activity. You pose a threat to other PHA tenants and/or employees. Or failure to furnish such information and certifications regarding household composition and income as may be necessary for PHA to determine rent and unit size. Tenants may choose to terminate their tenancy after the initial term, first 2 years, of the lease. Tenants must give PHA a written notice 30 days prior to move-out. As a public housing tenant, you may request a grievance hearing if you do not agree with certain PHA determinations. This is covered under the Grievance Hearing section of your lease. Some reasons you might request a grievance hearing include calculation of your annual or adjusted income and the use of such income to determine your rent, or termination for non-payment of a charge you do not believe you should be required to pay. Upon receipt of a notice from PHA, you have 14 calendar days from the date of the notice to submit a grievance for a notice of lease termination for non-payment of rent or threats to health or safety. You have 30 calendar days from the date of the notice to submit a grievance for any other notice. If you request a grievance hearing, the hearing will generally take place within 20 days of your request. Within 15 days from the date of the grievance hearing, a decision will be filed. Tenants who do not agree with the determination made by the hearing officer may file an appeal with the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas within 30 days. Tenants are given a copy of PHA's Grievance Procedure, which outlines the process both PHA and the resident are required to follow when there is a notice of adverse action that the tenant disputes. You can also find a copy of the Grievance Procedure on PHA's website. It is recommended that you read and follow the Grievance Procedure carefully. The Family Self-Sufficiency (FSS) program coordinates housing assistance with other resources to help residents achieve economic self-sufficiency. Participation generally lasts 5 years, during which time participants identify and work to achieve educational, professional, and personal goals. More information about the FSS program may be found on PHA's website. PHA works with Compass Working Capital Incorporated to administer the FSS program. In turn, Compass works with selected community partners that operate programs designed to empower families to increase income, establish and maintain good credit, access quality financial products, build assets, and otherwise achieve their financial goals and become financially secure. More information about the FSS program may be found on PHA's website. PHA's RPP team connects residents to a wide range of training services and self-sufficiency programs. RPP staff can meet with the families to review family needs and challenges and to identify strategies to help families select programs and services that best meets their needs. The goal is for residents to gain valuable skills and achieve self-sufficiency. PHA, through its resident programs and partners, provides career and other training, home ownership programs, youth programs, senior programs, health clinics, resident advocacy, nutrition courses, and scholarships. See PHA's website or contact PHA's resident services at 215-684-5300 for more information. As the last part of this briefing presentation, we will review the public housing lease and provide an overview of the information in each section. The information presented here is a summary and is not fully inclusive of all the elements of the lease. PHA strongly recommends that you read through the lease in its entirety and that you ask questions if there is anything that you do not understand. The first paragraph of the lease agreement shows key information such as your tenant ID number, the name of the property, your unit size, the start date of the lease, and the parties to the lease, being you as the tenant and PHA. The property lease section of the lease agreement specifies key information about your unit, including the appliances which are provided. This section also includes detailed information on yourself, your family members, and other household members. These are the only individuals who have exclusive use and occupancy of the unit. The property lease section of the lease agreement specifies key information about your unit, including the appliances which are provided. This section also includes detailed information on yourself, your family members, and other household members. These are the only individuals who have exclusive use and occupancy of the unit. The provisions below are part of Section 1 of the lease. When a non-tenant is considered to be an unauthorized occupant, who has the right to the unit as a remaining family member when the head of household no longer resides in the unit? When is it allowable to use your unit for legal profit-making activities? When existing tenants may remain in the unit while on probation or pre-trial programs? That pets are allowed as long as all requirements of the pet policy are met? That the terms and conditions of PHA's ACOP are incorporated into the lease? The initial lease term is for 2 years. Renewal is automatic for successive 2-year terms for families on biennial recertifications and 3 years for families on triennial recertification schedules, provided that community service requirements are met and that the tenant is not in default. The rent section of the lease term specifies key information about rent payments, including the initial tenant-based rent to be paid, how and when to make payments, and actions PHA may take if rent payments are late. Your first month's rent is due at lease execution. Rent is due on the first of the month by check or money order made out to the Philadelphia Housing Authority and provided to the management office. Rent payments can be made using credit card, debit card, or e-check by using the Public Housing Customer Service Portal on the PHA website at www.pha.phila.gov. Cash is not accepted. Tenants may request a good cause extension to the due date, and PHA will review the request and provide a response in writing. If rent is not received by the 15th calendar day of the month, PHA will issue a notice to vacate within 30 days for failure to pay rent. A $20 late fee will be assessed for late rent payments. If a partial rent payment is made and there are no other outstanding late payments, the late fee will be waived. A $25 fee will be charged for a return check. Rent that is late 3 or more times within a 12-month period without good cause is considered chronically late and will be grounds for termination if there is a delinquent balance at the time of termination. The security deposit section of the list specifies your security deposit amount, how the security deposit may or may not be used, and remedies available to PHA if the security deposit does not cover amounts owed by you upon move-out. The security deposit is the lesser of 1 month's rent or $99. Security deposits cannot be used to cover unpaid rent prior to termination of a lease. At lease termination, if there is unpaid rent or other charges due, the security deposit may be used to cover such cost. If charges are due in excess of the security deposit, the tenant remains liable for such charges. Keys must be returned before the release of the security deposit. The utility section of the lease agreement specifies tenant and PHA utility payment responsibility. The utility section of your lease also states that any utilities not supplied by PHA must be set up in the head of household's name or co-head's name only, and that failure to maintain active utility service in the head or co-head's name is a breach of the lease. The maintenance and repair section of the lease specifies how to request repairs and when the tenant must pay for repairs. We covered maintenance and repair charges earlier in our presentation. A reminder that if you are charged for repair, the charge is due and collectible within 2 weeks of the notice of the charge. The charge must be paid no later than 45 days from the date on which you receive the notice of the charge. The lease section on redetermination of eligibility, rent, or dwelling size outlines the requirements for regular and interim recertifications already covered in this presentation. Remember, you must report changes in household composition and required income changes within 30 calendar days from the change. If you report zero income, you must report an increase in income if and when received between regular recertifications. If you delay the recertification without good cause, rent increases will be retroactive to the scheduled effective date. Rent decreases will be effective on the first day of the month following receipt of the required documentation. The transfers section of the lease provides details on mandatory and voluntary transfers as already discussed in this briefing. Key transfer provisions include: if you do not comply with a mandatory transfer without good cause, your lease will be terminated. Instead of transfer, PHA may modify your existing unit if the cost is reasonable. If you are housed in a unit with special features which you do not need, you will be given 30 days notice to move if there is a family that needs the special features. Mandatory transfers are subject to the grievance policy, and PHA will pay for reasonable costs associated with mandatory transfers. We have already discussed tenant responsibilities in this presentation. The Tenant Obligations section of the lease specifies what you agree to do or not to do as a PHA resident. For example, you may not sublease or assign the units and cannot provide accommodations to boarders and lodgers. Also, you may not wash or repair cars or trucks on PHA property. Please read this section carefully. We have already discussed PHA responsibilities under the lease. The PHA Obligations section details these in full. Read this section carefully so you know what to expect from PHA. The lease section on defects, hazards to life, health, and safety details what you should do when you encounter a condition on the property that creates a hazard to the life, health, and/or safety of its residents, and how PHA will respond. PHA will repair or abate emergency conditions within 24 hours. For tenant-caused damages, PHA may take lease enforcement action if the tenant fails to pay for the cost of the repair. Rent may be reduced in proportion to the seriousness of the damage. However, rent will not be reduced for tenant-caused damages or if the tenant fails to accept reasonable alternatives. If the tenant is required to move as a result of the damages, the tenant must accept the first available unit, unless the tenant can verify good cause for refusing the unit. As discussed earlier in this presentation, there are times when PHA will need to enter your unit to conduct inspections and/or repairs. The lease section on entry onto the property by PHA during lease term specifies the protocol for this to happen. Whenever possible, PHA will provide 2 days advance notice of the proposed entry. Entry for requested repairs is presumed permission. PHA may enter if there is reason to believe an emergency exists. If no adult household member is present at the time of the emergency entry, PHA shall leave a written statement giving the date, time, and purpose of such entry. The default section of the lease agreement specifies when either the tenant or PHA will be considered to be in default under the lease. In this case, default means a failure to comply with the lease. Section 14 of the lease agreement is reserved. There is currently nothing in this section. The notices section of the lease provides that any notice required by the lease must be made in writing, personally delivered, or mailed prepaid first class. The tenant's and PHA's mailing addresses will be printed on the lease. As discussed earlier, the termination of lease and return of the property to PHA section of your lease specifies those actions or inactions by you, any member of your household, or any of your guests that may result in the termination of your lease. It is recommended that you read through this section carefully so that you are familiar with actions that may result in lease termination. PHA will provide 30 days notice of lease termination. You are obligated to pay rent even if there is a pending termination action in progress. Tenants are liable for all court costs unless the tenant prevails in court. PHA may terminate or refuse to renew the lease upon discovery of facts that would have made the tenant ineligible for admission. PHA may refuse to renew the lease upon discovery of fraud or false statements. Early in this briefing, we discussed the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA. This section of the lease, though, specifies that an incident of domestic violence, stalking, or sexual assault is not a lease violation by the victim, and outlines the actions that may be taken to protect the victim. Earlier, we discussed that you may request a grievance hearing if PHA sends you a notice that you do not agree with. The Grievance Hearing section of your lease entitles you to the Grievance Procedure. The entire agreement section of the lease outlines when and how the lease may be updated. PHA will provide you with 30 days written notice of any proposed changes to the lease. If a lease modification is implemented, PHA will notify you at least 60 days in advance of the effective date of the implemented modification. You will have 30 days to accept the revised lease. If you do not accept the new lease, your lease will be terminated for other good cause. The Invalidity of Provision section specifies that if any provision in the lease is determined to be invalid, it does not invalidate the rest of the lease. PHA staff must sign and date the lease. The head of household and all adults in the household must sign, date, and print their names on the lease. The lease contains specific places for various adults to sign, including the head of household and, as applicable, the co-head of household, other adults who are family members, the live-in aide, and any foster adults. Your public housing lease has a number of attachments that you need to review and sign. These include attachments for lead disclosure, smoke-free policy, pet policy, VAWA, community service, and smoke detector responsibility. We will review each of these attachments. Housing built before 1978 may contain lead-based paint. Lead from paint, paint chips, and dust can pose health hazards if not managed properly. Lead exposure is especially harmful to young children and pregnant women. Before renting pre-1978 housing, PHA must disclose the presence of known lead-based paint and/or lead-based paint hazards in the dwelling. PHA will also provide you with a federally approved pamphlet on lead poisoning prevention. The lead disclosure statement must be completed by PHA, the lessor, who will check the appropriate lines under lessor disclosure and sign and date the form as the lessor, and the head of household, the lessee, who will initial the appropriate lines under lessee acknowledgement and sign and date the form as the lessee. PHA is mandated by HUD to have smoke-free public housing. You will receive a copy of the smoke-free policy and will be required to adhere to the restrictions on smoking. Your resident handbook has specific information on locations around your development where smoking is allowed. PHA's smoke-free policy prohibits smoking on all PHA properties outside of designated areas. Except where otherwise specified, smoking areas are those areas at least 20 feet away from PHA buildings. If you or any of your guests are found smoking outside of designated areas, a notice of violation will be issued. The pet policy outlines requirements for keeping animals in your unit and differentiates between pets and assistive service animals. The policy must be signed and dated by all adults in your household, as well as PHA property management staff. It is recommended you read the policy carefully before applying to have any animal in your unit. Earlier, we discussed protections under the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA. The VAWA tenant notice details the protections offered to a tenant who is the victim of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. The notice must be signed and dated by the head of household. As discussed earlier, adults in public housing are subject to a community service requirement unless they are exempt. Each adult in your household must complete, sign, and date a community service acknowledgement and self-certification of status upon move-in or lease-up. If you are exempt from community service, you must provide documentation of your exemption. If your status is not exempt or you lose your exempt status, you must perform 8 hours of community service each month. The head of household must complete, sign, and date the tenant acknowledgement of receipt, installation, and responsibility for smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, and batteries. The form acknowledges the receipt and installation by PHA of smoke and carbon monoxide detectors with batteries in proper working order, describes the requirements to report when any detector is malfunctioning, and notes that you will be charged if any household member or guest damages a detector. Here is a listing of important phone numbers. These numbers are also included in your resident handbook. Your property manager will provide you with a contact card that includes his or her contact information. PHA's main office is located at 2013 Ridge Avenue, Philadelphia, PA 19121. The main phone number at PHA is 215-684-4000. We are here to assist you with your residency in PHA's public housing. We will answer any questions that you may have. The next step in this briefing process is to sign the lease and other required documents.